following Conscious Consumer Network recording of a live broadcast is available to purchase in high definition at ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a CCN pledger. For €10 a month, you can have unlimited access to CCN high definition downloads at ethymarket.com. Ethymarket, the ethical marketplace for conscious consumers.
Hey there, welcome. I'm your host, Bridgette Dolgoff, for the fourth week for Conscious of Economics, a dialogue. And today we have a really spectacular guest talking about some really interesting subjects. And my show is weekly every Thursday, and it is at 11 p.m. British summertime. And that corresponds to me on the Pacific West Coast as I go on at 3 p.m. And you can watch the show live. You can watch archives of it. Please check out the Ethymarket for all your needs and keep looking in the market for new things to show up. And one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about today, just to give it a couple minutes, is right now we're moving into a process where the energy that is being released out of our bodies, this is what my star being family tells me, is that we're moving into a place where right now we're releasing a lot of deep guilt, and it's showing up in dreams. You may have dreams of situations with people that you have guilt that you're still holding on to with those people. All different kinds of guilt, and it's showing up in the very base of the lower back, in the spine between the sacrum and the lower lumbar. And so, you know, you want to just breathe through that stuff as the guilt comes up and just completely release it. And the affirmation that I was given was, I stand firmly on both feet now. So anyway, hopefully that will help you in the near future. And now we're going to go on to my guest. And my guest is Richard Allen Miller, and the middle name is A-L-A-N, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And he is on the show for a second time, and he is going to be having a conversation with me over his work that has the title Lifeboats. And so since a lot of us don't really know what it's about, we are going to ask him a lot of questions about that. So, hey Richard, how are you?
Oh, my stock response is that I'm going bald from unnatural causes.
Well,
if I were to believe half of what I am discovering, I would, oh, wait a minute, I'm sick, I'm depressed, I'm sleeping too much, and I'm neurotic. And I can't continue to do this, so I've decided that the rule of thumb now is more sarcasm and humor.
Yeah.
Because if you were to believe half of what I'm now discovering, how could we not be depressed? I'm in the 99% category, which means I have no resources to bug in or bug out. I am basically at the whims of God. And God, in this case, might be one of the not one percenters. Who knows? You know, regulating chemtrails, Fukushima, or whatever. What I do know is that I can't continue like this because it's making me ill. So what do I have for options? And I started thinking about that. And the way I started this program with Sustainable Lifeboats was when I said to John B. Wells that the USS America is taking on water. And I don't know whether it's going to sink or swim. What I do know is I think it's time to start thinking about lifeboats. Wait, a sustainable lifeboat has oars. Can you imagine being in a lifeboat without oars? So, I mean, now we're starting to get a better picture of what a lifeboat is. Now, lifeboats are only good for the scenarios that they've been designed for. And as I keep going deeper and deeper into this mire, we have in front of us the end of a sixth epoch. And it's going to happen. the methane hydrates are melting, and we are already up over the temperature that caused the last ice age with the Jurassic period. And so we're going to have an ice age, a mini ice age that's going to happen. There's no way around it. Antarctica was at 64 degrees yesterday, and Greenland has waterfalls of the water melting off those glaciers going into the ocean. Nearest estimations today from the physics side of things is that we're going to have a rise in the sea levels of at least 60 meters, exactly like in the movie The Day After Tomorrow. And with the Gulf Stream now defunct, no longer in operation, and the desalinization of the sea, this will be the sixth ice age that this world, as near as we can determine, has encountered every 3,600 years. It is an epoch. There is a science fiction story written by Greg Bear called Epoch. And it talks about a pole shift, which is exactly what will be the third of a number of shoes that are falling. Now, the first serious event will happen within the next 2 years, and it will be a grid collapse. With that grid collapse, that will be the beginning of a series of cataclysmic events that will rewrite history and change civilizations. It's going to be just like that. It's not a bad thing. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't bug in or bug out deep enough or far enough to escape all of the different models that I'm now constructing with my physics. It's kind of doom and gloom in a sense. So I'm going to add a little sarcasm like John Oliver. I love John Oliver. A great English comedian that adds spin to a disaster like nuclear radiation. He did one this recently. I posted on Facebook on radiation. I'll send you that link. It's wonderful. You know, he starts with, you're going to hide in the 50s. We could hide from a nuclear radiation by pulling the picnic table cloth over our head. Now, he's got factual pictures of that. You know, I'm on the air. And so, you know, the way it's going now, I have no idea how that's going to play. But his spin is to show that we have over 4,000 nukes that aren't being managed properly in the United States, that doors that don't close because it lost a spring are being propped open with a crowbar. And I'm sorry, I'm on the air. Thank you. Well, I mean, I told him that the first time, so there it is. You can edit that out if you want, or just realize it's part of what we get with Zoom and me being where I am. Lots of people were going to send bodyguards to me so I wouldn't be interrupted. I apologize because I wanted to be alone today. Guess what? So what's going to happen first is that there's going to be a grid collapse. We almost had a kill shot last week. We had one several months ago. That would have put the Earth back into the Stone Age with electric current. And with that, all your various nuclear power plants no longer having cooling systems. That's page one. So I guess the message on that one is turn the switch off. Instead of building new power plants, throws down the ones that are already now leaking. Every single one in America is over 20 years old, and Hanford may be more responsible for the nuclear radiation we're finding in San Francisco now, leaking out of Hanford and down the Columbia River.
Yeah, well, and you know, I was reading an article a couple weeks ago that the radiation, and it's a fairly new plant, nuclear plant in Fresno, California, that's leaking 1,000 CPMs of radioactive material per day. Yeah,
I know. And all of the Daiichi-like GE plants that are in America right now, and there are 17 of them on the Madrid fault line, are all leaking. And you can go to the NETC, the National Nuclear Emergency Tracking Center, ENTC, nucleetc.com, NETC. And you can see the hot spots in Dallas, Texas, Fort Worth, Fort Worth, you can go over to Florida. Japan is lit up like a candle. There is nothing and solid news reporting coming out of Japan anymore. We have no idea how bad it really is over there. The background radiation in America today is 10 times what it was prior to Fukushima. Now, that means it went from 20 becquerels up to 200. Is that dangerous?
Yeah, I know. Well, in Reno, what was it, in 2013? Because we have that nuclear bomb radioactive material that hovers between Las Vegas, Reno, and up by St. George, Utah. So on a daily average, we're at 223 CPM daily.
So here's the deal.
But then when it went up to, in 2013 for 3 months, it went up to 653 CPM.
I understand that. So is that dangerous? Yeah, I'm trying to respond here now. Is that a dangerous increase in exposure? Yes and no. At 1,000 times background radiation, I'll put a dosimetry badge on and do high energy physics. At 100 times would be like going through an airport with 9 x-rays or flying from Hong Kong to LAX. That's what you get, 100-time exposure in an aircraft. So 10 times is a massive concern, but it isn't dangerous to grumpy old people like me. It's probably very bad to small children who have an undeveloped thyroid. There are foods you can eat to help protect. There are tests you can do to see if your radiation levels are exceeding normal things. Cancer is a daily operation in your body. What you don't want is the cancer to masticize and reproduce. And so cancer, your cells are always making mistakes. So that's part of life. But there are foods you can eat that will minimize, like your polysaccharides. Polysaccharides and beta-glucans are the primary reason why the pharmaceutical mushrooms have become very favored, like reishi and maitake, as a supplement for radiation sickness and related things. I know that I wrote a book called Power Tools that chapter 1 was the cordyceps and transfer factor combination that I fed the Navy SEALs acts as a broad spectrum antibiotic without the negative part of going in and indiscriminately murdering a bunch of germs in your body that are positive, you know, like lactobacillus and some of these other things that are necessary for good health. Your body has a lot of aggregate bacteria that are in different homeostasis with each other. That's why we're each of us galaxies. We're each of us a unique galaxy, quite unique, with a little molds here and a little funguses there and whatever. The thing is, when you start taking antibiotics and the forms of Western medicine, broad spectrum antibiotics go in and murder everything. And so they're like radiation. Is the good as bad as the bad? You know, just, you know, if you kill the cancer, what else are you killing? And so there are better ways to approach these things. A sustainable lifeboat would most likely include an herbal pharmacy, presuming if the grid went down and the municipalities failed to be able to deliver water to you. That's what FEMA's about. And if that water doesn't happen, you can well assured that Walgreens is not going to have your heart medicine. There's going to be delays on that. So part of your background is to have an herbal pharmacy on pharmaceutical alternatives that you would normally otherwise go out and purchase with money, which is, by the way, not real. Money in this kind of scenario would be seen more as a theatrical prop, where actually labor is real, not the wage. The wage means nothing. It's about barter and fair trade and whose skills you've got. And so the broader base skills that you have, the more functional you become, like a farmer. A farmer is like a physicist. It has a number of different expertises, including animal husbandry, heirloom seed collection, being able to weld and make a whiz gig, to harvest something a little simpler because his crop needs are different, irrigation, etc. He has to be an expert in a number of different things. So really, a farmer is not so much about farming as it is a way of life. You don't make money as a farmer. What you do is you change a lifestyle that is more high-ended. Can you imagine living in New York City, 16 flights up, and the grid goes down, so you have to go up and down to your apartment just by steps, and you have to bring where are you going to get your water? And so these are what sustainable lifeboats take into consideration. The military, I sent you a purpose on a project that I'm doing, which is setting up 4 models based on grid collapse, where they are sovereign ecosystems. And each one is a little different because of geography and habitat. And that's like what Bridgette said. You eat your environment. Obviously, if you live on the coast, you're farming fish. If you're living midland, you're doing grains. There are many different options on quinoa and as an alternative to wheat. And we have that experiment going on at Shasta right now, where there's a quinoa project. The quinoa has climatized to that region. It grows native now. That's what we're seeking, is something that's in sync with the universe that you find yourself in. And we have 4 ecosystems that we're working with in different parts of the United States. And so that's the sustainable element. I went to a bunker a couple of months back, a military bunker, and up on the surface, they had an aquaculture. This was an older form of aquaculture, which is a hybrid off of what we call hydroponics, where instead of using a soilless medium, what we're now using is strictly water. Where I start with a little plantlet that's about this size, and within 7 days, I'm harvesting a head of lettuce in full production. In 7 days, this was a horizontal system using the old sodium lights and the related things. The newer systems that we're using on space and on Mars are basically vertical systems. There are several different kinds that are more efficient in terms of the way they distribute and dispute light. Now, light is the bottom line in an aquaculture system, and it drives the photosynthesis and the fish. And what you have is a closed system where you have tilapia. This was when I worked Boeing in 1969. My job was Lunar Base Alpha 1. I worked under Art Pilgrim, and what we had was a clean room operation, had to go through sterilization to get inside the operation. Once we were in, it had grated floors with chicken running around, pooping through the grate into feeding chlorella, of which then the tilapia ate, and it was a closed system. You can no longer do that because the United States has made it illegal to use natural source fertilizers and minerals. Actually, what we discovered for a whole food, once the grid goes down and nobody can enforce it, is 1/3 chicken manure, 1/3 rabbit manure, and 1/3 worm casings. And those 3 in combination, 1, 2, 3, provide all the inorganic salts necessary to run any kind of hydroponic or aquaculture system. You do not need to go get your minerals from mineral sources. You can work them from natural resources. The reason they don't is the fear of E. coli. And that's an easy one to control if you understand the nature of the beast and run it as a clean room standard. Most don't. It's like growing a marijuana plant. You've got to, if you're not careful, they crosstalk to each other and you get hybrids. And that's what you want to do, is retain and maintain the pureness of what you're trying to do without contamination from outside influences or other plants. That's what an heirloom is. An heirloom seed is something that has been grown in a given region more than 3 generations of that cycle, to the point where it has climatized and has its own attributes for that region. In other words, it gives a bit broader leaf because there's less light, that kind of thing. So the sustainable part that I'm doing is classified, but there are many examples of different levels of sustainable agriculture going on right now. And when I say agriculture, food and the resource for your pharmacies are primary. But remember this, and how Matt said it, you have 3 minutes for air, 3 days for water, and 3 weeks for food. Food is your least of concerns if you don't have the right air to breathe or the right water to drink. And so those are items 1 and 2. That's why most of my sustainable lifeboats now include a greenhouse to protect from radiation and other kinds of contaminants that are now in the air. So it's a sustainable lifeboat will include a whole new level of hygiene in the way you approach your home. Like you take special clothing that you're wearing and you leave it at the door and you take a shower before you go into your bedroom. That kind of thing. It's going to require something like living on Tatooine in, Star Wars, that movie, where you're down underground and you have a little airlock up on top to get onto the surface where you're very careful about the contaminants you're going to get exposed to. With background radiation now at 10 times what it was originally, that's only going to increase. And with that will come the hazards and requirements for hygiene that we do not yet need to observe.
One of the things that probably, is a really important thing, a lot of people have zero idea, Richard, that we have, basically 180 nuclear power plants in the United States, and they don't even have fuel to run generators on premise anymore in case there's an accident. And the rod pools are completely full. Like they shouldn't even be putting any more rods in it. But a lot of people don't really understand about those workings and how long it takes for a rod to actually cool down. And there's no place to put them, obviously, because they're letting the pools fill up. So could you give us a little background, on, which could happen? I mean, nuclear, meltdown in the U.S. could be it could seriously happen.
There is a video that will be out shortly called Dark Star about the Santa Barbara attack on the grid there and what it implied. A group of ex-military went in, not maliciously, but took the grid down in Santa Barbara to prove how vulnerable we are and how dangerous it is to have the grid go down. Like Fukushima, more than those 3 reactors went critical. Actually, there were problems in other reactors on Japan that the media never reported. And the accident on Japan is possibly an extinction event. And so we don't even know yet. They don't even have a solution yet on how to begin to clean up a nuclear power plant. Now, my guess is that the Daiichi-like plant was designed by General Electric to be clean. That means there's not supposed to be any spent plutonium rods. Okay, so my guess is they were either cutting corners or they had weapons-grade plutonium there to saber rattle against China and those disputes that they're having with the islands. That's most likely, and it was an accident waiting to happen. It only took a 3-foot tsunami to knock it down. Imagine what a day after tomorrow 60-foot tsunami is going to do, like New York City. Now, with that said, it gets worse because while the cooling and the frost from a ice age will cool the plant, there won't be a 7th epoch to come back to because everything will have gone critical with the warming up and everything is dead. That leaves the Earth at, 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and glowing red. That is one of the scenarios NASA's printing right now and why their big program is the transhumanism movement and the Avatar program, where we have machines that we implant our consciousness into and can live in these kinds of environments. I have to tell you something that's really creepy. The amount of gamma rays that you get exposed to going from Earth to Mars, they did some experiments with rats, and every single rat had brain damage because of exposure to gamma rays in a normal spacecraft going from Earth to Mars. That distance and the exposure. I don't think people understand what the Van Allen belt is actually all about. The fact that they're trying to drain the Van Allen belt with some projects. And now we have a computer called Jade 2 software program for the Jade Helm experiments. That is an artificial intelligent computer that can predict, like Minority Report, what you're going to do before you even know what you're going to do. It's based on intent. Does that mean that they're working with future? Yes. That means that they're able to go in and know what you're going to do before you even know what you're going to do. They have you that well profiled now with Jade 2 software. So with that said, we're in a brave new world where I'm watching scientists dancing ghost dance at CERN platform in Geneva. What the heck is that all about? I mean, this is crazy making.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, what do you think about that? There is an occult element within all government agencies. That's one of the reasons I got into the occult as I did, and why I now wear my Eye of Agamotto. We'll talk about that later. Basically, magic was reserved for the ultra elite of Europe for centuries. And you will find the Republican Party, when I taught at Harvard, Skull and Bones was strongly going there. This is the little secret societies and clubs that have to do with ritual and the celebration of myth. And to do ghost dance on the CERN platform would suggest a bunch of creeps trying to bring around biblical prophecy by opening a doorway or a gate for Apollo or Enlil or whatever you want to call that second being that is also known as Shiva, the destroyer. Now, I don't know what's going on. What I do know is I see all of this around me and it's making me sick. So I'm going to become more like John Oliver and laugh at some of it as being absolutely ridiculous. I will tell you that at our level of consciousness, the distinctional difference between intent and purpose are essentially the same. They are different. Purpose is why you're here. Intent is what your conscious mind is trying to do. There is a slight difference where imagination is reality. And as such, as we evolve, we are all of us going to have to take more personal responsibility for the thoughts we choose to entertain. It is those thoughts that are creating the alien attacks. It is our imagination. A fallen angel or an angel, a messenger from God, in my universe, would probably be a Terminator, a machine without conscience, doing God's will. Now, no empath, no sensitivity to what the other person's different belief system might imply. And I see this in the machine direction of AIs that we're talking about, and even wrote about alien presence on the internet back in 2001. And that was based on a study that Time magazine did about, in terms of interviewing the top radio people, all saying there was an actual conscious entity that was left over from the original, what we call that project that the Navy did to hook up and create a supercomputer by ganging 380 computers in an algorithm. It was called, I think it was SETI, the SETI program. And it was not the study for extraterrestrial life. It was the study to put a group of computers at a university together. It needed 280 of them. The project I did, Project Solo, which is the first weapon deployed now by the United States, is a single aircraft using synthetic telepathy and mind control going over the region to make all the inhabitants give up. That's what happened in the first Iraq war. Didn't it seem strange that 200 or 300 Iraqis come out of the bunkers with all these AK-47 stacking them in big line, and it was only being guarded by 2 GIs. That's something else is going on here, and we don't have the big picture. And I would say that with the way money is going with Spain and then Portugal, I think it's time to start moving toward your own personal sovereignty. And where I've started with no money is I have located the local growers at the farmers market that have what we call sustainable agriculture. It's called community supported agriculture. It's CSA. It's part of the organic movement where you hire a farmer to grow your food. And what he does is you give him money and he farms for you, and you get so many boxes of food each week from the farmer's market. That's CSA. That's a good place to start. I would think about water and have a minimum of 3 days of water on hand for every single person in the household, and a backup plan on how to replace it the first day. And that, if you have that, you may not need FEMA. I don't know. FEMA came through here last year talking about the big one, an earthquake off of, Crescent City that will drop the coastline at an 8.4. My guess is the Himalayas and the earthquakes that they sustained and the amount of deaths that were lost, they underplayed the actual Richter scale by downgrading the actual event in terms of what it was. We are now watching our sun regularly sending off kill shots toward the earth. At some point, the grid is going to collapse, and when it does, water is going to be your first priority.
But, okay, so we know, though, that, there's been experience on the planet, like in 1880 or something, when there was the sun was active and fried all of the wiring, the telegraph wiring, it fried it all. So they know it's not hypothetical, it's actually happened.
Yes, and we've had actually worse shots than that in the X-band recently. The sun is no longer on its 11-year cycle, just like the earth no longer has the ocean currents that it did. And so our weather is changing, absolutely. And what's going to happen will be most accurately that movie, The Day After Tomorrow. Gutenberg Bibles are not going to keep you warm. Trust me. I'm trying to burn a Gutenberg Bible.
Well,
the temperatures are going to drop, like in the movie when they showed the RAF helicopter crashing and the guy sticks his head out to see what's going on and he's dead within 3 seconds. The temperature drops 10 degrees per second all the way down to minus 100. Nothing will live. You're going to need frost lines will be at 10 feet. This storm will most likely go down as far as Texas. I don't even have a clue how far down it will go in Europe. It will be global. It's like basically resetting the ocean currents and resetting the salinization of the sea so that the currents and the weather patterns reboot themselves. And basically, you can see the Earth as a mini sun, that what happens on the sun then is reflected on the earth like a hologram at a different level of resolution. And really, the sun is no longer in an 11-year sunspot cycle. That has all changed because of that one event that happened in 2004. It rebooted the sun, and now the sun is in a whole different phase, just like the earth is with its ocean currents.
Oh, so sorry. So I don't want people to appear that I'm being naive here. You know that I'm not being naive. I'm a pretty smart girl. And I know quite a bit about a lot of things. But one of the things that my native teachers, my Native American teachers have been teaching me is that we, have caused this on ourselves, and that they, as medicine people, were able for a whole long period of time to try to hold the balance here on the planet.
Oh, the ritual of the wobble egg. No kidding.
So anyway, but because there's so many people here, there's so many energies that a lot of them can't uphold it. But they said, when we get out of balance and relationship with the things around us, our relationship to grandfather sun, fire, grandfather fire, we get out of relationship to the earth and all of these processes has led us to this destruction that's happening. And I mean, it seems like it's happening to us, but we've done it.
It's grandfather David Montanga that actually said it for the Hopi. And actually, medicine in the American Indian tradition are the songs and dances and legends. And the Hopi were considered first because they had the oldest songs and dances going back to the Culvis tribes that climbed out of caves 3,600 years earlier and left cave drawings of what is about to happen today to us today. And their medicine are the songs that they sing. David Banaka, or Thomas Banaka, gave me this medicine pipe. I never met this David Montanga. He was the shaman that was called Grandfather David, that was the one that died at the crossroads when Jim Morrison was 10 years old, and the military sent me in to understand what crossing over to the other side meant. There was a transference of information or something. And that can be found in a very interesting book called Secret and Suppressed by Feral Press. And there's a nice story about Grandfather David and Jim Morrison, and the fact that Jim Morrison is not dead, because when you cross over to the other side, you don't die. Now, this is a different kind of human or a different kind of life form. And these songs that came out of the Clovis culture 3,600 years ago show Planet 7X going through the system with a debris field. And what happened first was they didn't have a grid go down. In fact, what I'm doing for the military now is studying the concept of song and movement, like the whirling dervish, and how it can change time and space. That was a technology the Germans were interested in that was never explored in our current culture. We're romantically involved with electric current, the fragility of that, and its relationship to the grid and the sun is kind of creepy. And that's where I sense we're going to have some serious problems. So the first thing the sustainable lifeboat needs to take into account a grid collapse. That means, can you live off the grid for 30 days? And I'm going to be doing a series of videos for One Studio on exactly that with Matt Stein. You were, by the way, the one that helped us set that up in Reno back in 2010 when Matt and I first met, and Carrie Cassidy did her, I don't know, what's a podcast called The Megas that came in from out of the cold. Before that time, nobody knew who I was. And basically, I was the guy that did this for military, and now I'm back again on payroll trying to figure out what we do and what we do not do to survive. I am very depressed. I see us going as an end of our civilization, like going from Atlantis to Greece. And the Greek culture was unbelievable. And I have been in southern Mexico and watching them unearth a city that is larger and more technically competent than New York City is today. How does that work? These are cultures that had other technologies, had other directions in the way they use their technologies, and didn't survive. We have genetic memory, a priori knowledge. It's based in our genes about past memories and things of that nature on these different epochs. This is epoch number 6. If we don't turn the switch off on nuclear energy, there won't be the ability of a 7th epoch unless you're radioactive and eat radioactive particles.
Yeah, well, we're at this crux, and a lot of the medicine people, that I work with, they're doing things that they normally wouldn't do. They're leaving their reservations, they're hitting the road, they're in their cars, they're going and doing ceremony where the earth is in the worst shape. They do this for free. They just know where to go. They have been meeting up, different tribes that usually didn't get along well, they're meeting up and they're working together because they're trying to really save what is going on. And they tell us right now, neither side of the coin has been decided whether we're going to be able to pull out of this and it's going to be rough, but we still be able to manage it, or it's just going to totally destroy. They say it's still undecided, So one of the things too that I just kind of wanted to talk to you about is I follow a path of shamanism like into South America and stuff, and some of the teachers. And one of the things that they have told us, especially about like South American cultures that totally left the planet, or we thought, like just all died or were massacred or extinct, but they tell me that what they were taught as a culture is that they knew, because they do the dances and everything so they can read the future. They know information about the future. And that they all were trained, like 600,000 people in these cities before they knew like certain white people were going to come or certain bad things were going to happen. They used the dreaming world, which they did was they held the picture. All 600,000 of them sat in their city in the same spot daily for months and months and months. They all held a square of that picture. And then when they were all ready, they actually all energetically held that picture and they shot themselves into a branch and off world of this world, and they still continue to live there. And periodically,
that's interesting. That's Dr. Stanley Krippner, my mentor, wrote a book called Dream Telepathy when he worked at Maimonides Dream Labs, and they had a dream therapy session in Ashland this last weekend. And dream physics would suggest that dream time has more content to reality, REM sleep, than actual consciousness does. And that's why the body requires it. It is the way you organize memories and your relationship to things. And what made us actually God's favored is that we have EQ. We have another layer of information and our emotional response to something that an angel is more like a sociopath that doesn't have any feelings. Doesn't work like that. And that's what gave us choice. And the bad news is we're also laced with complacency, ignorance, and being ill-informed. And so one of the educational things I discovered was education and your experiences are the one thing you do get to take with you when you leave here. And that death is not what we think it is. I got to spend 2 weeks in the jungles with Eben Alexander and his wife. And in that time frame, based on my studies with Kubler-Ross, I came to realize that consciousness is not really reality. It's a dream. And that dreams themselves may be closer to reality, and why the Hopi and other Aborigines place so much emphasis on its importance in the scheme of things. And actually, all of this comes from older technologies from previous epochs, why we're now seeing magic, which is the art of changing consciousness at will, as a higher form of physics. The ability to do sleight of mind rather than sleight of hand, like Legerdemain.
And can we acknowledge something here real quick for people? Having an affirmation every day isn't really going to make that change for you. You have to really get a practice, and be committed to your practice, in order to develop that kind of energy, right? Your intentional energy to project at will.
So, but with a computer now that can predict your intent before you know it, would suggest that we now are working outside space-time. And the distinction between intent and purpose is very, very fine and probably indistinguishable at this level of consciousness. But purpose is why you are here, and intent is consciously what you plan to do while you're here. And the difference between that and intentionality, where you miss it by that much, that part is the distinctional difference of what makes a machine close to being like what I would think an angel would be. And a superior in all elements, can outfight me, is stronger, made from metal, does not have the restrictions of needing air or water or whatever. And yet, what caused the war in heaven was probably because God gave us a choice. And that's where the complacency and ill-informed part come in, and our responsibility for, the thoughts we choose to entertain. Basically, we are right now creating our own aliens. We're creating our own apocalypse with our imagination. At this level of consciousness, imagination is reality. And as such comes the responsibility of taking control of the thoughts you choose to entertain, because that is, in fact, then what creates the reality you enjoy. And that to evolve and to ascend would suggest that you can witness the distinction of one belief system from another and choose them like you would a pair of clothing. That doesn't mean you get rid of something that you believe in very strongly, like Jesus Christ or whatever, but it may not be appropriate in the situation for the accomplishment of your purpose. And what made a Navy SEAL a Superman was that I taught them how to change their belief systems so that their mission became their intent. They couldn't fail. Even if it got them killed, that was part of what it was about. And so that's what distinguished a Superman, because they were outside space-time. However, the distinctional difference between intent, which a computer can now predict, we know it, and your purpose is the fine level between being God's favored and simply operating on a machine level. And what we're trying to do now is evolve our consciousness in a manner that allows us access to more of our imagination.
Imagination in a good way. Hey, do you have your Power Tools book around there that you can grab?
Oh, I probably have one over here somewhere.
So you show people?
I have Power Tools.
Okay, well, it's good to show people what it looks like, because if they want to get it, they want to make sure it's the right thing. Okay, slow down there. Power Tools. Okay, this is your last book that you wrote, right, that's been published. Do you want to give us a little bit of talk about it?
Well, I'll just read off the back. These are the protocols that were developed for Navy SEALs to create super soldiers. These power tools can be used today for your own personal evolution of consciousness. That's what it's about. It's a second in a 3-book series. The one I've just completed, The Non-Local Mind in a Holographic Universe, or How to Change the Movie. And I can teach you a couple of techniques on how to do that. The one that everyone seems to want to know is the secret, Masonic secret, the big Masonic secret. Do you know what it is?
Tell us that.
Here it is. You ready? The thought that occurs at the moment of climax happens.
Oh, yeah, it's sexual magic.
That's sex magic, tantra. It is the concept of intent. And if you're thinking about someone you shouldn't be, that's how the marriage goes sideways.
Yeah. Well, you know that. What was that guy?
You have to be very mindful of that.
Yeah, I think he called it practical magic. Or no, it wasn't practical magic. But anyway, he's the famous comic book guy. He's Irish or Scottish. I forget his name, but he's really good at magic. But he said he would actually, make sigils and stuff of what he wanted, and then he would tape them onto the woman he was having sex with, as a sigil, so that when he climaxed, he could project that image, which had, the statement and the intention attached to it through the doorway. And he said,
that's called creating a magical child.
Yeah. So anyway, he said that every time he did that, he got exactly what it was.
Now, here's the bad news. Here's the bad news with that idea. Yeah, we'll remember his name. Sounds like I'll remember his name too. That the bad news is, if you don't do this, if you do this for things, not spiritual growth, you will get those things. I did it once for $50,000, and the way I got my $50,000 was a truck drove over me.
Yeah, no, that's,
yeah. In other words, when you do this, realize there may be an expense paid for this thing. And that if you're doing it for spirituality, for spiritual awareness, then it doesn't matter what happens.
Or you could do it to stop the people who are pushing the chemtrail agenda. Do you know what I mean? Like you can project that energy out there.
I would hate to do that and discover that the chemtrail thing was actually trying to save the Earth.
Yeah, I know.
Here's the other part. Here's the other part of that. You never know what God's will is. Just because you're doing something that I don't agree with does not mean you're wrong.
Yeah, no, that's
God's will. In other words, you can't make judgment on anyone else. What you can do is run your own ship correctly. And that's the other part of a sustainable lifeboat. You want to choose who you're in the bunker with for like-mindedness. That's why I think you'll find a lot of these different sustainable lifeboats were like the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh in Antelope, where a whole bunch of fanaticals got together with a common core belief. And that's what you will see in sustainable lifeboats. You'll see religious zealots like Seventh-day Adventists or Mormon. You will see that these lifeboats engender more people with common religious or religious-like efforts. They're looking for a way to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's I've lost it. It has to do with the purpose of religion is for fellowship, to reinforce your values. But spirituality is not what you do, but how you do it. And that's where you get closer to the Lord. It is the purpose of intent. That is the distinction between purpose and intent, which is discussed in my new book. That is, I started with the intentionality experiment with how do you impress your thoughts into water. They had some experiments on that. And the problem with that is that's what a computer's doing right now. And so intent is not quite the same thing as your purpose here. And intent has to do with consciousness. And that is now predicted by a computer even before you know it. So that's kind of creepy.
Yeah, the whole playing people, too many people trying to play God, Okay,
well,
so
that would be an artificial intelligence trying to become God.
Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
I think a lot of people behind the scenes are artificial intelligence from somewhere else that have been trying to control the scene for a while too. Okay, so let me just hi. If you just turned in, you're listening to Consciousness of Economics, a Dailog TV show, and I'm your host, Bridgette Dolgoff. And my special guest today is Richard Allen Miller. And we are talking about his lifeboats projects and consciousness and whatever is flying by today. And to support Richard and his work, you can visit his website, which is on the main page. And you could get his latest book, Power Tools. And that would be a really great thing to do in order to support him in his work. So, all right, we have like about a half an hour, 20 minutes. Okay, is there anything that you can, because when you guys did the workshop here in Reno, you and Matt's first workshop together, where your lifeboats work has kind of been seeded from, is growing from. You had some really fun things that you would do with the audience. Do you think you could do anything with us? Or give us like some kind of spiritual practice or something that will make us use our non-local mind this week so that we can give them a practice on that?
Well, I can tell you, yeah, I know what you want me to do. I can't in the time we have in the audience situation with ESP, but I can suggest that thinking with instinct, with your gut, is going to take you outside space-time. Instead of working with thought processes and logic, your upper brain, the upper brain will give you a scenario of what you want to have happen and what also could happen. The fact that it could possibly happen then falls under Merlin of anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory, which means if it's possible that I could get shot, there's a likelihood I will be. However, when you're working with the gut, you don't think on those kinds of levels. And so you simply are working basically on instinct. And in current metaphor, that is called extrasensory perception. It's outside space-time. Now, how do you develop a rapport with your gut and your instinct? You could start with some of the foods you eat, obviously. You've got a habitat of a whole bunch of organisms in there that are in conflict and in some kind of corresponding effect with doing this and not doing that kind of thing that forms who you are. And so there are ways of getting toward an instinct thing where what you would do is you consciously, with your mind, ask the question you want to know. Once you've done that, that thought has been put out into the universe. You then drop into a blank mind state, very similar to a meditative state that starts with the third eye, where you draw your attention internally to where your third eye is, and you try to dismiss all thoughts where nothing is conscious anymore. And then what will happen is an ocean will come up and create an image, and it's the first image that comes into your mind's eye that is the answer to your question. And you will often say, no, that can't be right, and go back looking for a more logic brain. And what this is about is to make all your beliefs true, including getting shot. So if you don't think about it like that, if you think about your question as your purpose, you want to know what that is, and you want to know it, that's the concentration part. And then you let it go. And the moment you let it go, the universe answers. As quickly as you let it go is as quickly and as crisply as it comes to you on what to do. And that's called instinct. And when you work from instinct, your chances of survival in a gunfire or whatever increases by 1,000 times. You will survive. Somehow, it's some outside space-time, and you get closer to your purpose of why you're here. And why you're here is to do something. Your job is to try to discover what that's all about. It takes time to do that. That's what is the little thing you probably wanted me to do that I did over a 2-hour period, where I would take you down into some guided images using hypnosis. That's my first book, ESP Induction Through Forms of Self-Hypnosis. That was the first protocol I gave Navy SEALs, how to think with the gut. Once they did that, then it didn't matter what happened, because it was what they were supposed to be doing. That is how you evolve.
Yeah, and it seems like to me, not that if you live that way, it's not that you avoid guilt, but if you're living kind of with your instinct and your gut, you have less to be guilty about in your life.
Well, guilt is one of the fallen angels, like jealousy and rage and anger. It's like one of the behaviors or qualities in man that is the least desired. And so we would call it a demon, fallen angel. The other part form the composite of all of it, of which composite of God, which is all of it. And so guilt is supposed to be a little square over here, just like ego is over there. But ego is not that you don't get rid of ego. You don't get rid of guilt. You put it in its proper true position in the scheme of the rest of it. And so it has a little dot over here that's there, and you have that guilt part. But overall, you're still doing your purpose. And guilt is the questioning doubt part of being outside the box. That's voice of coyote and voice of reason. And when you're inside the box and everything's all safe and hunky and you know what's going to happen, you're happy. But when you step outside the box, now you have uncertainty because you have no idea what's going to happen. And that part is very frightening to very many people. And fear is the little killer. That's the first enemy of man.
So I have a big question for you. If people could change the picture, and you have people that are working on a picture, right, to put their energy into.
Yeah.
What kind of picture would you like to see people focused in on creating in a mass consciousness? What would you say, like, for example, visualizing people cutting the switch off on the nuclear plants and disassembling them? Do you think something like that? Like,
that would be a byproduct of a mental state of attitude where rather than being into capitalism and communism, we moved back toward communalism. That would be tribal, where you're working with a small group, a rural community, semi-rural community of small neighborhoods. A neighborhood can be distinguished from other neighborhoods by the bar at the end of the street. That was called Cheers. They made a whole comedy on that one. At the end of the day, you go down and you have your little bar at the end of the neighborhood. And it was, everybody knew everybody else. And every once in a while, there'd be something strange that would go through there. And that's where it all starts. The neighborhood, the small community, the family. That is what is missing today. There are now 2 generations of kids out there that have no family. And family, what you learn in a family, a school can't teach you. Schools are for socialization and behavior around other people with other values and other, belief systems. The family is where you learn your belief systems. The problem is beliefs should be used as tools, not given absolutes. And you should be able to think about changing a belief like you would a pair of clothing. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of it. And the metaphor I always use is that I have a pair of bell-bottom pants in my drawer that I'll never fit in again, but I'll be damned if I'll ever throw it away. It might be thrown away by someone else, but I'm never going to throw that pair of bell-bottom pants away. It's got a 32-inch waist. I'm never going to have a 32-inch waist again.
I might not ever have a 32-inch waist again.
But I kept the pair of jeans that was that part of me because it reminded me of a very special part of myself when I was baptized or whatever. You understand? Religions are the same thing. Religions are core beliefs that often need to be revisioned because they might not be appropriate if you're going into Iraq. And the metaphor I used with you before is, if I were a staunch Christian and 2 aliens walked in the door, would I be able to see them? That's what we talked about when we go to Iraq, being a Christian. It may not be appropriate and might get you killed. And so it doesn't mean you get rid of your Christian beliefs, but they may not be appropriate while you're in Iraq.
Yeah.
There it is.
Well, that brings up, more of a global thinking, which is a more conscious place to be too, is that, your world and what you believe and where you live and everything may not be appropriate to take somewhere else. And the Indians, the Indians that I've been with, they pray about that. Like when they have to leave to go to somewhere else, they do tobacco prayers and they ask the spirits there, to receive them well, that no bad things happen to them, and that the spirit world try to help them and teach them.
That's why the sustainable lifeboat has 4 different habitats. There's differences, like Gurdjieff said. If you live on the coast, you should eat fish. If you live in the Midwest, you should be eating grains. It has to do with climatization and your environment. And they used to call a science on that called macrobiotics, but really it has to do with the fact that your body has climatized towards certain kinds of food groups and needs for water. Have everybody noticed how much more water we're all needing to drink now because of geoengineering? The actual dehydration in the body is unbelievable. I can't believe what I'm experiencing just myself.
Well, you were the one that explained polymers to me, that they use a lot of polymers in the chemtrails that actually absorb, they have to absorb water. Like even if you use ones in construction that are polymer based, it'll crack your fingernails and stuff, and it steals the moisture out of your skin if you don't use gloves and stuff. So it's the same kind of stuff. So it steals all the moisture out of the air. It steals moisture out of the
Well, they put desiccants inside the polymer. A polymer is just a plastic structure that is so constructed as to hold water. It doesn't mean it takes the water out. That's usually either barium oxide or, aluminum or something of that nature that will act as a desiccant to form these artificial clouds. What they have is a bacteria that they have modified to turn into a nanobot to create these polymers, and then they line it with barium and aluminum oxide. And right now there are medical doctors out there that are describing the nanoparticle aluminum in your brain that is now going to cause Alzheimer's and loss of memory in thousands of people more because of geoengineering.
Yeah, I think the latest statistics coming out of the United States is 1 in 7 has Alzheimer's or some beginning dementia. 1 in 7 people, adults.
From aluminum oxide.
Yep.
It's in everything. You can do a swab inside your mouth, put it on a slide, and at 600 mics, there it is. You can see it.
Well, this is the other thing. It hasn't stopped people from using aluminum and drinking sodas and stuff out of aluminum, which is amplifying. I mean, I'm not saying that you're going to get around not getting any chemtrail aluminum debris, but, a lot of people drink beer every day, 12-pack in aluminum cans, or, cook their food in aluminum, which is, enhancing and adding, like, even quadrupling their aluminum consumption in their diet.
Yeah, actually, our romance with the kinds of foods needs to be seriously revisioned. And I would say that one of your goals in a sustainable lifeboat is that you're able to produce 40% of the food you eat. 40% of the food you consume should be grown locally in your own garden. If you can do that, you have a better chance of survival, and that is part of a sustainable lifeboat.
Yeah, one of the things that I did for 4 years is I built food productions in people's backyards as urban farm project. And the key to have an urban farm is that you have to have an animal manure. So I allowed people to have hens for eggs, or fryer chickens for, slaughtering for chicken, or rabbits that they could actually eat, in their own yard. But they had to produce something. Everybody always goes for the hens because they don't want to murder anything. So they're like, egg production's cool.
Yeah, but layer hens only have 4 years of production.
Yeah, no, they don't have a very long life. But,
yeah.
I do have to tell you, I have people that I know that got older chickens that were like 3 years old to start off with, and they produced until they died, and they had them like 4 or 5 years. They were treated so well.
Yeah.
But anyway, one of the things is
how
that
you do it is the foods you feed the hens, and you want to change the food chain. So what I did when I was doing 650 free-range chickens, I had a bunch of them, and the food cost on that was exorbitant. And so what I did is I found a microbrewery that was constantly having to throw out their spent barley, and I would give them some eggs and fryers as an exchange for their spent barley, and I got my poultry feeds for free. And if you don't think free-range chickens do not like spent barley.
Well, and one of the things in my urban farm builds that, I kind of learned to develop over time was that I had people focus in on growing at least 25% of their food annually, even in, cold frames and cold conditions. And the other thing is, too, that they grew for the chickens or, whatever they were feeding. So there was always excess produce daily, along with, them collecting bugs and free ranging. But there was always like green material that they could eat. So having to buy feed was like, not as much as it would have been because they were sustainable.
The other part of this is there's another part of this equation that needs to be taken into account, and that's the bonding that you have working with animals. There's something like working with the soil that's unbelievable. And this is a process. Simon says you can only go halfway to the door each time I give you so you never ever get to the door. It's the journey. And so the first year I put a garden in, I didn't even grow anything. The second year I learned how to grow things, and it was only in the third year that I learned how to can. And now the fourth year, I'm learning how to eat out of my cupboards. It's a process. It's not supposed to be overnight. It's a gradual process. Everybody has their own speed. My first recommendation would be to do an inventory of who your local growers are that are at the farmers market and get to be friends with them and get familiar with the community supported agriculture, where you do 40% of the food you eat is grown locally. If you can do that in the next 2 years, you may have started your own sustainable lifeboat.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's doable even on a quarter acre. I know people who did. One of my teachers at Rudolph Steiner College, he was in the basic, biodynamics, and one of the things that he did kind of as a thesis, a living thesis for his work, is that he lived on a quarter acre house, just regular in the city, and his goal was over 3 years to be able to grow the most diverse diet on that quarter acre. And he did it. And he ate pretty much, 95% of all the food off a quarter acre. And he had grain, and he had, this, and he had fruit, and he had all this stuff. But he totally fed himself. And if you grow only like 25%, it's doable. You can still work another job. And if you're planting trees, plant some frickin' fruit trees. Plant some nut trees, some fruit trees, plant something in your yard if you're going to water it that actually will give back to you and it will feed you. If you're involved in your city and your city councils and your organizations, don't let them plant some, trees that don't have anything to offer people. So what if they're messy? You just got to go out there and pick up the fruit more, but get people
it's
to
called
plant.
bleeding. Yeah.
Yeah, get
I know
people.
when I was in Yakima, they used to have huge piles of apples and apricots that were going to rot. And what I used to do is run them through a hammer mill, puree them into a sauce, and troll them into fruit leather.
I mean, the thing is, it's like endless. But if you don't have any food to rely on, we've in all the developments, with housing and stuff like that, it's all been bulldozed over. All the topsoil has been removed. All of the natural landscape and the edible food has been removed. So we're at some point, we have to actually start putting that back into our environment, things that we can eat and different kinds of food sources that will grow, naturally as landscaping. It's not that complicated.
Edible landscaping is the English garden, which is different than the French garden, which is mostly mazes and, those kinds of things. In the English garden, they'll put thyme growing in between the plants on the steps that you walk, so that as you step on the cement, you actually bruise the mint and you have a flavor walking through the garden. There are different kinds of gardens, many different forms of them. I love the English garden because it's a wildcraft. You can forage all your foods in an English garden.
And all your medicine. Oregano raw in a salad is like super good for you. And it's like a natural antibiotic. It'll keep you well. It'll keep your
terpene alkaloids. You can make paint out of it.
Yeah, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. And you only need a few in your salad. You don't need to be like, well, I really put some oregano.
No, but things like chickweed, for example, Stellaria medea, that is considered a nuisance in a garden, actually is the highest source of iron.
Well, and we talked about purslane. Purslane grows almost anywhere I go, and it loves concrete for some reason, likes to grow in cracks of concrete. But that stuff is some of the most nutritional stuff you will ever.
It's high in omega-3 oils. It's highest terrestrial source for omega-3.
Exactly. And you can harvest it right along the, sidewalk. It grows everywhere.
I fed the purslane to chickens working with the Amish and played Mozart music, and they laid a low cholesterol egg just by eating purslane and playing Mozart. And that was an Amish project that they did all along the Eastern Seaboard, marketing their low cholesterol egg because the chickens were happier and less stressed.
And eating well.
Yeah, food chain. You start with what you feed the animal. If you're going to eat the animal, you start with your food chain. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so do you have anything, we have about 10 more minutes, so do you have anything that you would really, like to discuss, or some kind of
but I will mention, I'm going to be in mid-July, I'm going to be doing a psychotronic conference in Chicago in mid-July. And this conference was originally put on by the man that's sponsoring this, is a retired high school physics teacher who's doing what his father did. And I was one of the first keynote speakers at this conference in 1974 with Dr. Carl Schleicher, also known as the Smoking Man. And so I'll be at this conference this July as a renewal 45 years later. Well, it was 74. I guess it was 41 years ago. And that's a psychotronic conference in Chicago in July 14th and 15th. There's going to be a bunch of speakers like Bearden and others that are there that are quite impressive. Old guard talking about psychotronic energy, free energy.
Well, and I noticed you sent me an email, and a couple of people were presenting topics on electronic medicine and energy medicine, and a guy's been doing studies on the ethereal body and how to send waves towards the ether body to heal people and their physical problems. Just amazing. And we're working on getting some of these people on the show. So what are you going to be presenting at the psychotronic?
Mine will be, I'm going to do several things, one of which is the non-local mind, how to change the movie. That's all part of what I do now, trying to empower people toward making changes in themselves. Because if they can do that, as Rudolf Steiner said, you make changes in yourself, and so the world changes with you. That was Rudolf Steiner.
Well,
that's where you start.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites. So how do you, I know that a lot of us get to a point where everything kind of gets us down. We go through periods where things seem like insurmountable tasks, and we do get depressed, and we have a hard time, moving through it and finding our way and getting back on our path. So can you talk to us about some of the techniques that you use?
Yeah, sex helps. I don't care about anything after I'm kidding. No, it's all part of your relationship to yourself and using humor and sarcasm and not getting too serious about any of this, because some of it is outside your ability of control. There's nothing you can do about it except make the glass half full rather than half empty. And the neat part is that glass is refillable, which means that should it become empty, you can fill it up again. Not a problem. That is what imagination is and what made us, in my opinion, God's favorite. The fact that we have choice, and now we need to start paying attention. And education, as I said, is the one thing you do get to take with you. So be mindful. Be the fact that you are, complacent, ill-informed, and ignorant. Start that change. Educate yourself. Take a course at the community college. I don't care what age you are. I'm 71 and I'm going back to school. I love it. As far as working with the soil, there is something so rewarding when you can empower yourself producing your own food. There's something remarkable that happens. It is a type of sovereignty that is more than health. That's what I guess I'd like to leave the message with.
I fully agree. And, the only thing that we have, that could save the planet, especially with radiation and everything else, really is the fungi and the mycelium, which is a serious
Well, you can use hemp. You can grow hemp. That will bioremediate the radioactivity. And where are we going to put all that radioactive glowing hemp? We'll put it on the moon in all those different pockets that it created for us. All the craters on the moon, we can fill them up with spent hemp that pulled out the radioactivity out of the ground. I'm just kidding. Actually, there's a lot of things that will bioremediate toxins out of the soil. One of the things I'm going to recommend, however, is that you start with a greenhouse, something that's sheltered from the atmosphere. That is a primary consideration now in any sustainable lifeboat. You have one of your food sources is covered.
Right.
It's not
and you can also use cold frames. You could build them, as much as you need and put soil in them and then keep a lid on them.
I am finding that aquaculture, this one greenhouse that was 280 feet long, had a throughput of 50,000 head of lettuce every 24/7, every day. That size greenhouse produced that much food. It doesn't take a big greenhouse to produce the food you need. It just requires labor. And labor is different than money. Labor is real. Money is a theatrical prop.
I don't know how clean the food is, but I read this article on Disneyland in Orlando, Florida, I believe. And they have one huge aquaponics center with, up and down aquaponics where they're growing all of their lettuce and, mostly leafy vegetables. They're growing like 60% of the food for all their restaurants on site. So they pick it fresh every day.
That's what Chattanooga does, yes.
But I don't know how clean I know that they're probably not using, bio-equal solutions, which biologically okay for the human body. I think they may be actually adding in some other kinds of chemicals that are probably not that nice. But that's huge, a huge amount of food.
Yeah, they're doing that in New York and New Jersey, where the tops of buildings now are a greenhouse and produce all the food for the cafeteria below it. And that is the new direction in your urban farm project that you're doing, where you're seeing a lot of the cities trying to produce their own foods like Chattanooga rather than importing them in from countries that you can't even pronounce.
Yeah, and even though, they're still going to have, contaminations and stuff, there's a component to growing in your area. Food takes in what's going on in your area as it grows. Plants take all that in, and they have to grow against those things. So they can create not antibodies, but they can create energies and nutrition and different things that can help you combat some of the issues that you have health-wise, especially eating from your own.
Well, that's why you eat your environment and why our different lifeboats in different regions are constructed quite differently. And when one might use aquaculture, another would use a fish farm. The actual fish farm, the fish facility, where they grow fish up near the Rogue River in Lost Creek, I actually visited that, and it was in full production. And that single fish facility produced enough protein to feed the entire state of Oregon. The actual infrastructure that we need is mostly in place, just needs to be revisioned in how it's distributed.
Okay, so we're just going to move on to the spiritual practice, and then I just have my closing prayer, and we're out of here. And so this week, do what Richard Allen Miller tells you as a spiritual practice. Every day, if you have a question, get yourself a question, and you're going to be quiet. You're going to sit down. You're going to get in tune with your third eye and your gut. And you're going to listen, and you're going to wait for things to quiet down. And then you're going to wait to see what comes. You may get an image. You may get a feeling. You may have a voice talk to you. And Richard says that is your answer to your question. And to listen to that answer, promote listening to that answer as the truth and the answer of your question. And don't let your logical mind talk you out of it. So that's going to be your spiritual practice for the week. And my closing prayer. Yeah. All right. Sorry, it's kind of a long closing prayer, but it's an important one to me because it's part of my spiritual path with my medicine people. teaching me how to make good prayers, right? And intentional prayers for all people. So this is part of, you have to be forced to listen to it, Richard. Okay. Aho, Creator, Great Spirit, I come to you in a good way today, to ask you in a good way. I ask in a good way that all people, young, old, all colors, races, come in balance with our home, our Earth Mother, in a good way. I ask that our consciousness and unconsciousness be unified, that our physical bodies and our emotional bodies be aligned, our Earth bodies and our galactic bodies be aligned, that our minds and our heart be aligned, all in a good way. I ask that the wisdom, understanding, knowledge be brought to us in the way that each one of us needs in a good way, so that way we may reconsider our actions, deeds, doings, and beings, that we may come into alignment and balance, harmony in a good way, living in a good way with each other, our mother, and all living beings on her and in her in a good way. Aho, Creator, and so it is now. All right, that's my prayer. So we also want to talk about Richard. He's going to be back here on September 3rd, same bat channel, same bat time, and he is going to be talking to us more about the non-local mind. Yeah, hey, it's in his new book that's coming up, and we're going to get to hear about the psychotronics workshop and all that. So anyway, Richard, big kisses. Thank you so much for your time and your intelligence and your work, and thanks for keeping up and staying in the game with us and not giving up on us. But anyway, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to close the show, and you can see the little button, the red button, the leave meeting button, and you can turn yourself off and have a nice rest because you've had a busy day.
Yeah, I did. Thank you very much, Bridge. You take care, kiddo.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was the fourth show in the weekly show on Thursdays, Consciousness of Economics, a Dialogue. And I'm your host, Bridgette Dolgoff, and we are going to be continuing to bring topics of shamanism, ceremony, food as medicine, farming, urban farming, hopefully some biodynamic farming. And, maybe a little paranormal mixed into the lot. So stay tuned and be good to yourself and be good to each other and be good to the earth. And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
If you really had to make a difference on a large scale with minimal resources, how would you go about it? Have you ever dared to dream of doing that which seems impossible? On a planet steeped with corruption and destruction, the question beckons, how do we change it? Media has a far-reaching impact on people and has been used to manipulate humanity into our current destructive patterns. In order to affect people into moving into constructive patterns of behavior, we need to construct a new paradigm of media. Conscious Consumer Network has been created with the explicit intention of giving the amazing truth-seeking, solutions-orientated, alternative media a place to fully realize their true potential with a cutting-edge, high-tech professional media platform. In turn, some of the greatest freedom-seeking hearts and souls of our time have realized the true potential of what has been created and have come together to provide their insight and inspiration on CCN. Conscious Consumer Network has become a unique, interactive information and educational network which provides a free-to-view, live-stream, ultra-high-definition channel to the world and features 25 live shows a week and growing with the addition of multiple language broadcasts. CCN has features comparable with mainstream media, such as being able to pause and rewind broadcasts whilst being live streamed. Catch up on missed or previous broadcasts, now available from CCN High Definition Downloads. You can now purchase a high definition download of your favorite CCN show from ethymarket.com. Support free and independent media by becoming a monthly pledger. This can be done with a monthly pledge of €10, which will allow you unlimited access to CCN's high definition downloads, which hosts a back catalogue of over 250 shows which have been aired since the launch of CCN on the 1st of January 2015. In order to keep CCN free of corporate sponsorship and advertising, CCN has launched the Pledge 300 campaign. This is a realistic goal with the hopes of securing a minimum of 300 people who will each pledge €10 a month. With this number, we can continue to grow and operate and potentially expand into a second foreign language channel. Help keep alternative media in the hands of the people. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.